All good, I'll just go straight into it. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another HMG episode. So today, there's obviously been a little bit of a, let's call it a hiatus in the show, and then we've been waiting on a few things to come forward. Yeah, just a little bit. And predominantly, that's because, well, unless you've been living under a rock, you'll know that V3's coming, like genuinely, really coming. And so Gorcin and I and Jacob unfortunately couldn't join us tonight, but we were just going through and looking at, okay, so what are some of the things that we know about V3 that are coming? That not We will talk about some of the rumor mill, but the reality is we want to talk about the things that we know about. Um, I have gone through many different edition changes of different systems over the years, and so I'm kind of just like I've ridden this roller coaster before, uh, and I've been in the hype stages before, and I've been in the I hate everything about this stage before. So this is more a case of let's talk about what is there that they've shown us, and so we will touch on the structure of the new army building selections that they've got to start us with, and a few of the other bits and pieces they've revealed for the unit special rules. We know that several other people have already talked about those things. And we recommend, as always, go check out those channels, Juggernauts, Bo Mortison, and the things that are going on with Brad at Cast Dice. Check them all out, because we're all sort of doing the same thing. Whereas, like, we'll talk about what we know about, and we'll try and get something where we don't. But the reality is, we're all just going to have to wait for the rulebook. At the time of recording, we're going in just before the next update for MMGs that Warlord will put forward. So that one, unfortunately, we won't cover too much here outside of probably the Greyhound unit card that we've seen. Um, but yes, I think it's quite exciting, and Gorchin and I are going to have a good discussion. So welcome, Gorchin.
Thank you, Dan. Nice to be welcomed onto my own show, our own show. It's very rare. It's like when you come home and somebody says, "Oh, welcome home." You're like, "Yeah, that's actually really nice. I could get used to that." No, yeah, not really too much to add on to it there. I think what we're going to try and do is just try to pull together what we know so far and try to fill in a few blanks. Particularly, I think one of the things that I want to do is definitely assuage a few fears and put out a few fires, um, and also try to be like basically a one-stop shop for bolt action use. I know a lot of our listeners don't have the time of day that we do to sit around and like read through every single possible thing and zoom in on extremely pixelated images to kind of rival the camera that is equipped on my toaster. But really, we're just going to try to work through them. I think in terms of fears that I want to assuage, if you are somebody who has come from a fairly popular, well-known wargaming system that tends to publish like army rules like cyclically, like every month you'll get a new army book for one of the factions, or every 6 months to a year you'll get a new one for your specific army, and every 3 years you get a new edition. And every time that happens, like you kind of got to go out and shop. You got to put a whole bunch of your models in the bin. Well, I mean, you shouldn't do that unless you're a filthy dirty towel player, but we're not going to get into that here. uh you find yourself, it's like, oh, I can't use my collection anymore, or I need to go buy these other units. um that is not a thing that's going to happen here in bolt action, and there's a couple of good reasons. And the first reason is, or actually, before I get into them, this is not just me saying this. This is things that Warlord have said and Marcus Vine has said on multiple different like channels now, but perhaps most recently I think it was on in terms of like chronology, reverse chronology was on the Warlords podcast. Sorry, the Juggernauts podcast. He was saying that they made a really big deal of not invalidating anybody's collection, and they also, that was a huge focus for them in developing the army composition rules, which is one of the things we're going to deep dive today. And actually, they kind of took the opposite approach. They were like, well, hang on, what are all of the things that you actually have in your collection that you can't normally use? How do we make an army composition that, one, lets you use what you would already have, basically the contents of a starter box, or maybe somebody who's just collected one army or starting to collect an army? What are all the things that you would have anyway, or any bolt action player has for any faction? they're going to make that kind of the core. And then they said, okay, now that we can make sure army composition can do that, how do we make sure everybody gets to use all of the other stuff they didn't normally get to use? So I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but ultimately that's the kind of distillation. So let's just put out that fire. Your models are going to be fine. You don't have to buy new models. If you've just bought into bolt action, you're coming in at a great time. Everybody's super excited.
Yeah.
And even if you learn the rules now, yeah, you're going to have to relearn some portion of them. We can't say how much, but you'll be relearning with everybody else. And that's just a really great place to be. So don't worry about building. Don't worry about buying. Just get out and enjoy the hobby. Now that we've kind of put out that fire, um, the previous episode we were talking about the news for bolt action. The main thing that we were talking about was us trying to pull apart this article in April about everything that they had let us know about. If you want to kind of see, that's going to be a pretty good overview about what to expect for bolt action v3. Just going to hit a few high points here. It's the game that you know and love. That's really the key thing. They are going to be supporting all of the things that make bolt action what it is now. So every nation is going to get an armies of rulebook or PDF or something like this available at launch. We don't have any word either way about whether they're going to be free or not. The main rulebook is going to contain the big five. So that's Great Britain, USA, Germany, Japan, and USSR, the Soviet Union. It's going to contain the big five. And they said everything else that exists in an Armies of rulebook should have a PDF. Now there's some things that haven't said either way on. They've said that they're going to be supported, but not necessarily which way. They said, say for example, right now we've got Australians and Canadians are not strictly in their own book. They're like a flavor of Commonwealth. They haven't said which way that's going to land. But they did kind of caution that if you have a very specific niche version of something, um, Marcus, the example he gave was like, if you have a very specific flavor of partisans, that specific flavor might not be represented. However, the interpretation of that answer is that the partisans will also be supported in that one. I think place my impression is maybe somewhere like Chinese warlords, maybe some of the Greece stuff. That's going to be kind of where we're not going to see them supported at launch. But that one is me guessing.
And my thoughts would be pretty similar. I think they're gonna have it's almost like a baselining activity, right? So we're going into, like, we know that the point system is going to get adjusted in some way, shape, or form, right? So the big five are getting done. We know that naturally, irrespective of how many minor nations are getting some sort of support at launch, we know they also will be getting points adjustments in line with what the whole system is now going to be doing. So even if let's say your specific force that you've created, and I'll just hypothetically say, let's say that it was an Australian contingent or a Romanian contingent that you had built. The history is there that you built it around and what it was for, and you don't find an exact fit in the first launch. It's probably going to be very important to understand that that doesn't mean you can't play. It just means that any specific things that you had that you would have liked in your force aren't yet developed or released. And so it's all still World War II soldiers, right? At the end of the day, that's where
Yep.
it's coming from. So some instances you may end up with through the abstraction of the way it works, you will have to proxy certain things, maybe. Again, it's very, very hard to say up front. What
Yeah,
we
I think just specifically like clarifying on that Juggernauts episode, Marcus from Warlord said that everything that has an armies of is going to get one in or at launch. So that, and he said the only thing you're not going to get is some really specific stuff. So
Yeah.
you you'll be able to play whatever you've got. Is basically my takeaway from that, which I think is a fantastic place to start.
Oh, it's brilliant. It's great. And knowing that, we'll get into some of the other things that are going on. But when you actually look at the platoon structures and the way things are going, um, with how you construct those armies, yes, we don't have all the details necessarily, but it is still going to be a core infantry game. I know there's a bit of points that are running around everywhere going, oh, everything's just going to be Dacre Stewarts now and blah blah blah. You're applying the version 2 like
Correct.
constraints and parameters into the very very tiny amount of version 3 that we know, and so
Yeah.
could it still be like that? Entirely possible, but we don't have enough information to say yes or no to that. And so like Bo has a great point on that. Don't worry about it. Like just don't stress about it. We only
Yeah.
know what we know. Um,
Which
so
which is actually a good point. What do we actually know about V3 so far? I think we have 3 pages from the core rulebook. We have 1 unit card that we have seen. The 3 pages in the core rulebook are unit special rules, and there's actually quite a lot we can infer from them.
yeah,
And the key thing is infer.
yes,
And we know what the core, I'm going to go with core, army composition rules are going to be. That's the only thing that we really know for certain. Now, some in terms of like actually evidenced, and also we're going to see about those 3 or 4 pages from the core rulebook that we've seen. There's actually something that might suggest it's not final version as well,
yeah,
um, which I think some people have missed. The the last part is the one fairly consistent narrative that we're seeing is that you have to be very careful about the biases that somebody's bringing from version 2 to version 3, specifically around the units that are good, or the units and the abilities and the weapons that are good, and the things that will be good in version 3. Um, they obviously haven't given us a full, like, here's your matrix of things that are good and things that are bad and things that will be good and things that will be bad.
wouldn't that be
um,
amazing if we had that?
yeah, I'll email Marcus. He's great. He's going to reply immediately. And he's going to say, wait till whatever
Yeah,
date when
yeah,
we talk about this. The the key thing to take away from that is just because something is good now doesn't mean it's going to be good in V3. Um, but also that we should expect things to change fundamentally in terms of units that are good and units that are bad. We're going to
mm,
see why as well as we dig into some of these special rules and these army compositions. There's going to be some really strong clues there. But detective and tinfoil hat work aside, they've specifically said expect that to change. So
yeah,
I know right now Dacre Stewart's is the Phantom Beast, as is like an army of fanatic bamboo spearmen. I think a lot of those things are going to fall away. I don't know it, but I feel it in my bones. Like I just my skeleton for a long time was held up by a love of Shermans and slowly replaced by just the points efficiency of Stewarts, and now that is a frail skeleton that is waiting to be reinforced by Shermans that have thin sides and they don't easily catch fire. But I digress. So where do we want to start, Dan? Do we want to look at some special rules, or do we want to talk about army composition?
I think we should go into the army composition pieces first, because
Great start.
I think starting with that will help us frame what those special rules might actually attach to. So I'll just flick up now. Unfortunately, I can't share the screen properly, so the viewers at home will be able to see this, and Gorchin's going to
The
have to
editor
trust
will
me.
edit
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So, so I'll just flick up here. So naturally, the first one, and I'll just zoom this in a touch. Sorry, the first one again is that rifle platoon. So this is now going to be. I mean, the generic reinforced platoon already had a commander plus 2 infantry squads as typically your base requirement. That largely hasn't changed, except with the
Mm-hmm.
difference now that they're saying your army must include a rifle platoon. And so you most
Note the language though.
forces, not
Rifle
quite the
platoon.
language.
No, yeah, but more so to those who might not have read the article, might think we're paraphrasing here. It
Oh
specifically
yeah,
says
yeah,
rifle platoon, not generic reinforced platoon or anything like this. And that's
yes,
something that I really want everybody to cotton on to here.
yep. And so the rifle platoon itself, what is within it, you've got your mandatory units of that commander and two squads. Importantly, those squads are not allowed to have the engineer special rule, which we will get into in a moment. You've then got up to two additional infantry squads, which also cannot have the engineer special rule. So straight away, all of your core infantry that you build within your rifle platoon, um, you are not going to be able to, for example, just dump four flamers in those squads as engineers. Like that, just that under the rifle platoon, that cannot happen. Then you get the options of a medic, a forward observer, a sniper team, an anti-tank team, and they're all 0 for 1 choices. Uh, then you have 0 to 2 light mortar teams actually supporting in that space, similar to what you would reasonably expect for some of the historical platoons. And then you've got a 0 to 1 transport vehicle for each of
Hmm.
those units.
Yeah. So that a lot of that seems familiar in terms of a reinforced platoon.
Mm.
I do note that there are a couple of key things missing though, and
Yeah,
I think this is something that I suspect that again some people aren't cottoning onto. Is that a lot of people are focusing what's in the platoons, and that's really obvious. But let's have a talk about what's not in the platoons. So
yeah. Do you want to lead us
you're
off?
there's no higher officer choice,
Uh-huh.
um, particularly not in the rifle platoon. It just says platoon commander and it says HQ. I interpret that to mean that officer rank, so lieutenant, captain, major, etc., is now going to be, there might be a separate unit or it might be one unit that you can choose the rank of the officer, and that means that it's also going to be separate to the experience level. Again, that is an interpretation, but I'm not seeing any higher officer slots. I'm also not seeing any flamethrower slots. I'm not seeing any artillery slots, and I'm not seeing any tank slots or armored car slots either. So
Yeah.
right now, if you look at a generic reinforced platoon, there are almost as many types of slots as there are slots. Uh, you've got officer, you've got your platoon commander, your mandatory lieutenant, you have your higher officer, you have your medic, you have your chaplain, also missing. You have your forward observer, 5 or 6 infantry squads, your sniper, medic, dog team, maybe, flamethrower team, anti tank team, your artillery gun, the armored car, and the tank slot. And then, of course, the transport slot. So a lot of those choices are actually missing. Now, I don't want, I don't think that means you can't use those units if those units don't exist. I think they have been shifted into types. The categories have been broadened. That's the impression that I've got. Again, just going off the idea, it's like, why would they make your models invalid? One, they specifically said that they're not going to do that, and two, also chaplains existed and it's a historical war game. You can't just say that they don't no longer exist. Dan, anything that stood out from this constructor?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things like so absolutely that same point that you've got there of looking at what is not under the basic rifle platoon. Some of those things also historically make a lot of sense. Like your your
Mm-hmm.
your your medium mortars, your artillery support, your tank support, your reconnaissance units, they weren't actually part of the typical rifle platoons. They were supporting elements that were attached to rifle platoons or supporting in the area. Um, so we've
Particularly as like for a company
seen
scale attack or something.
for a
Yeah,
company scale attack, that's right. So we've actually seen a closer alignment to what could argue to be a more historical structure, which
definitely.
I like. That's a bonus for me. I think there's a couple of other things that are picked up in that. My interpretation of that one platoon commander may be a radical change to how officers work, where it's
Mm.
simply
Mm-hmm.
you actually don't have ranks now of officers, you just have a platoon commander, and it's about what the
Oh,
model looks cool or not, but you simply need more commanders across all the forces. So
yeah, right. Nice.
that's a possibility. Again, very much inferred. I
Sure.
do notice as well the basic rifle platoon being limited to 4 infantry squads. That's quite a big change. A lot of the like the
Mm.
theater selectors and generic forces that we're used to, you could spam up to 6 choices in that one theater selector. That won't be possible in the current in that one platoon. The difference is, of course, you've got other platoons you'd supplement that with. Um, Something that I was really glad to see, and it kind of follows. Oops, sorry, just flicked my mouse there. It follows through onto some of the other components as well. There's no mention of tows. There's just mention of transports, and that actually,
Right.
when we get into
Missed that.
when we get into, well, it's a very minor point because they essentially
Mm.
do the same thing.
Yeah.
But it is something that's a bit different. Is that, maybe they've actually consolidated how transports are used, irrespective of their cargo, which that would simplify, just things that we have to remember, and I'm in favor of that.
Definitely.
So yeah, I do think it's quite interesting. One of the other things that I've seen a lot of people do is they've gone, oh, but I can still take like 0 to 3 anti-tank teams for Soviets in a rifle platoon. And that's where, like what you were saying before, Gorchin, that's where we have to be careful of that confirmation bias of what we're bringing from V2 to V3. You do not know that that rule is going to exist. You
You don't.
don't know what those national rules are going to look like. You don't know if there is national rules.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
They might, it might just be like, rather than being national rules like
yeah.
armies of the United States, it might be I don't know, like division rules. So,
Yes.
oh, you're playing 101st Airborne, um, and it might be that all American divisions get a couple of rules that are consistent across all of them, right? But then, let's say there's 4 division rules. One is consistent across that entire nation, and then there's like 2 that changes slightly, or there's one that changes slightly, and then the other 2 are like division specific. We have no idea. We know
Yeah.
that there is going to be armies of nation, which makes me think that national rules are likely to
We need
to be a
something to
thing.
separate. Yep.
Yeah, and we know that it's armies of nation, just because of the language that they're using around that. It's not going to be like, here's a book about American divisions or whatever. But I guess this is us kind of stretching the information that we have.
Just,
You actually
just.
pointed this out to me just before the call, or
Mm,
just before we started recording. The rifle platoon specifically calls out light mortars,
yes.
and it's not like because right now it's just a mortar slot,
Yep. I think.
and I
I
think
think.
that's really interesting.
Yeah. I think that's actually quite a big change. So, um, the I say big change. Obviously, we don't have the context of everything, but infinitely on the face of it, the direct right, on the image of the rifle platoon is actually the
Mm,
heavy weapons platoon, which
yeah,
talks about being able to take mortar teams.
yeah,
But in the rifle platoon, you can specifically take light mortar teams. So suddenly, the provision of the amount of potential HE you can drop into, where you were limited potentially to 2 mortar slots before, now you can take 7. 2 of those being light mortars under a rifle platoon. Like that's a
yeah,
considerable
baby.
amount. Like that's a lot. And so,
Yeah, I'd be curious to see how mortars change and HE
uh-huh.
changes in general.
Yep.
One thing just before we dig into the heavy weapons platoon, and I
Mm,
think we've cracked the case on interpreting these charts in terms of what is present, what is not present in equal measure. But one of the things I just noticed, I don't know if you've got your physical rulebook handy. I don't. Force selection here, page 184, 185. I I think that's early compared to the current rulebook. And if I don't know where this number comes from, but it seems that everybody's saying 300 pages for the V3 rulebook. It might have been one of the early articles that I forgot about. But yeah, again, what do we interpret from this? I have no idea. I suspect that the if we say that the rulebook is 300 pages long, and this is me not having a citation for that, I know I'm just as disappointed as you are. Um, if we say there's 4 selections occurring roughly about 2/3 of the way in, I think that it's not unreasonable to say that that last 100 pages is going to be the armies of. And if we talk 5 nations, about 20 pages. Again, sounds like a lot at face value, but they have a lot of units to cover
yep.
because they're going to be piling in and consolidating theater and rulebooks. And that also means that the missions might be before this, because if they keep the same layout, but who knows? Who
Yeah,
knows? How much can we infer from 2 page numbers?
yeah, again, um, I don't mind liberally stretching what we think could be feasible there, considering what we knew the layout to be previously. I'd also be interested to see, if those numbers are sort of, let's say they've got 100 pages worth of telling the story of history of how the different nations fought and recapping their
Hmm.
involvement as a brief history lesson. It's like, okay, so that means that let's hypothetically say that was 100 pages. So then we've got 80 pages across the rules, how to set up probably the missions, probably the how to set the boards up with terrain and interactions. Oh, actually, 80 pages to do all that before we even get to understanding how to build a force. I feel like that's almost more than what is in the rulebook at the moment, because I know that like as you say, the army selections at the back of the main version 2 rulebook.
Yeah.
There's not 20 pages per
No.
force in there. Like
No.
it's definitely not. So even if we only got, and I say only got in a very very hypothetical sense, but if we only got 20 pages per force, I think that's a significant uplift from where we are.
All the way around. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Um, look, hang on. There's an index. I forgot.
oh
There's an
yes,
index.
I wrote that
So
down in
15.
capitals.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's go. Let's go. I don't know. We'll go 15 pages. Give us like a whole bunch for an index.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
Before we really just go into some spurious claims here. Heavy weapon platoon. We got a platoon commander, two
hmm
machine gun or mortar teams in any mix, which
yeah,
is very good.
that's
Big
cool.
fan. And then you have an optional 0 to 3 mortars, optional 0 to 3 machine gun teams, optional 0 to 3 anti tank teams, and then one transport vehicle, soft skin or armored per unit in the platoon.
Yep,
So, yeah, again, interesting that we're seeing kind of that 0 to 3 for lots of different unit types. And what seem to have been specific to nations, like 0 to 3 machine gun teams for the US, the anti tank teams for the Soviets, and I think the Japanese get a few versions, a few flavors of this. Um, Really great to see that this is something that all uh, armies can take now. I'm not sure whether to call them platoons or companies. I'm avoiding using the term platoon because your army list is made up of sub platoons,
yeah,
which again we're going to get into that shortly about the limitations around it.
mm,
So I'm just going to go with army for now.
yep,
Yeah, really great to see. I think looking at this, I would be horrendously surprised if the 0 to 3 rule also returns. I
yep.
don't I don't see why like the US would suddenly be able to take 15 machine gun teams. That sounds stupid. Um and that's STOOPIT stupid. Like I don't I don't really see that being a thing.
No, and the same
Yeah.
I think with, and that's what I was sort of hinting at before, where I think the national rules that we're used to in how
Yeah.
and how to build lists and how those national rules would affect list building, or in the case of multiple MMGs, not affect list building. Um, I think that's all going to get shaken up because you're basically saying, well, any player who would like to just play with some more heavy weapons in their force, well, we're going to give them the opportunity to do that. And yes, there's still a, let's call it an element of tax building in that with the platoon commander and the
Sure.
machine gun teams. I'd also
Yep.
stress that we have no idea again about what the scale and scope of those platoon commander choices are. It could be that they're actually not a massive tax to take and they're simply about creating that theme
It
in
could
the
be free.
force. They could, yeah, it could be a free addition. It could be, or maybe they've got some other sort of special ability where you have, um, uh, I'm going to say, some form of that platoon commander gets to exert certain controls and benefits
Mm.
to his
Mm-hmm.
units, and so
Mm-hmm.
they're now more than just attacks. They're actually going to benefit those units in some way. Um, but I do think that you know the being able to put together 5 machine guns in a force as simply the addition of a platoon, um, certainly in the current version 2 environment, that would be ludicrous unless they were mounted on vehicles. Like, you just wouldn't bother spending the points on it. This is a very clear indication that no, you're probably going to want to add those machine guns in some way, shape, or form. You're going to want some sort of coverage, and we're going to give you enough to have 5 if you really want to go all guns blazing in it. Um,
I
that's a
have possibly
big.
a little it's a little tinfoil hat here with the platoon commander, and I'm gonna justify this a little bit as we get into the other ones. I would not be surprised if they are no longer a standalone unit, and instead
Hmm.
that there's something that you have to attach to an element in your platoon.
Hmm.
Um, and or maybe not necessarily that would be true for all platoons, but there's specifically one or two platoons where I think that's the case. So now that we've kind of covered those two platoons, the engineer platoon is where I actually think there's another little clue in here that a lot of people have actually missed. And you have to be a little bit of a symbology nerd like me to cotton onto it. And yeah, so
I
engineer
think.
platoon, you have to take a platoon commander. Again, no surprise. You have to take two engineer squads, and they must contain the engineer special rule. Um, and you can then take 0 to 2 engineers, 0 to 3 flamethrower teams, and then 0 to 1 transport per unit in the platoon. So here we're kind of seeing the return of flamethrower teams as individuals, like separate entities. So again, not invalidating anybody's collection here, but also there's no such thing as the token engineer unit in a truck anymore. You have to take at least 2. If you want engineers, you have to take at least 2.
Yeah.
Um,
I
and I
think
think
you go ahead.
I think with the little special rule that's coming up, I might actually, I would not be surprised if suddenly everybody has a couple of engineer squads or an engineer platoon in their force, particularly if they keep changing the things, if they stick with the idea that not just units, but also rules or maybe pieces of terrain that were suboptimal are now much better.
Yep.
Yeah, nothing about this like platoon kind of sticks out to me aside from the obvious, right? In the sense that you can't take a token engineer anymore. What about your thoughts here, Dan?
This was a very interesting one, and this is actually so I agree with the your interpretations here to go. You can't just take the one and
Yeah.
one and done and be good to go. You are going to have to invest in a platoon. Um, as I started to look into it, and again, I stress that some of this is inference. I don't have any proof for it, but I then went, oh, it's interesting that in the images directly below the engineer platoons, they have 2 units of 6.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that was creeping in the back of my mind when we were looking at the infantry
Mm-hmm.
group is the rifle section that they've got in the picture is only 9.
Mm-hmm.
Now, those are very different numbers to the normal 10 and 12s that we would have seen in previous images. And maybe they've just done it to get some variety
It
in the
just looks nice
photos
on the
and it just
page.
looks
Yeah.
nicer and it works on the page. That's 100% possible. Part of my thing that plays in the back of my head is that we go, engineers, um, sure, you have to take 2 squads of them, but the actual max unit size may not be what we think it is either. And maybe your engineer squads are small specialist units that have to now go do a task on the board as opposed to being able to take 2 units of 10 and roll them up in a truck with flamers. Maybe they're not as sturdy as what we were used to as a 10-man squad protecting a flamer. That would be quite different. And again,
And
full inference,
and
no proof, but
no, I'm grinning like an idiot here, Dan, because I think you just cotton on to exactly my little point about here,
yeah.
cryptology. How well do you know your like military symbols?
Oh, I know enough to know that the way we thought we were using engineers is probably not the same anymore.
Yeah, fair enough. So for those who don't know, and the diagram is going to be on screen, so don't worry here, Dan. I'm not going to theoretically expect everybody to keep up with me here. Have a look at the flamethrower teams. So you have a symbol there. I'm actually not sure if that's a standard NATO symbology for a flamethrower team. If not, I'm convinced it should be. There's a dot above it. So that one dot indicates section fire team strength or patrol strength, so
Yeah,
half squad strength.
yeah,
Two dots indicates squad strength, three dots indicates platoon strength.
mm,
So based on those things there, we've got engineer squads with two dots. So that would indicate, in standard kind of NATO symbology, you're talking about a roughly 10 to 12 man section or squad. And then a patrol or a brick or half section is, 4 to 6 men typically, right? So, how strict they're being on the use of those dots in terms of those exact numbers, I think is probably out for the jury's out on that one. But I think what is important is that every single platoon has the right dot for the right size unit, and every icon has the right size dot for the right size unit. So that to me suggests, like, I actually kind of agree with what you're saying there. I think particularly with the engineer special rule that we're going to look into, I think we're going to see things like this. You're going to see units having specific rules and specific effects, much more so, um, or they're going to apply more generally. Because I mean, the current engineer rule at the moment is like you remove obstacles if you're next to something for an entire turn, and it, it has great campaign play. I'm certain that there's going to be some narrative scenarios where it's relevant, but for the average game, not really um, that key.
yeah. It was also inconsistent. So
Oh yeah,
depending on which engineer team you were talking about, and not even just across the entire game, but actually within a faction itself. So,
yeah. If
so
you
the
got the Royal Engineers
Royal
faction from
Engineers
the
from
wrong book,
British,
yeah,
yep, yep. So I think so. Certainly, I am appreciative of consistency and alignment to go. If it's an engineering squad, irrespective of how they did it on the battlefield, because they all would have done things slightly differently based on their
training
training
equipment,
and
yeah,
their equipment and stuff, but they were there to do a task, and their task is often to, yes, go through and clear out terrain, or to
breach,
to go breach and to like to get into a space that was defended. It's like, well, we need guys who know how to blow things up, or we need guys who know how to get into this to create a spot, or to use the flamethrowers. Like, they were specialist
yeah,
weapons. Um, I think the token squads that we've got into these days under version 2 generally were the 10 wound flamethrower that you put in the truck that you will try
delivery
and ram, and
system,
yeah, the delivery system, and you just try and get that flamer to go off and hit the enemy hard. I think the scope of what the engineer rule is when we get to it actually opens up the whole unit a bit more instead of just being
yeah,
about the flamethrower, and that's a massive benefit for this type of unit.
yeah. If we now kind of move on to the artillery platoon, you
Mm,
have a mandatory platoon commander, a mandatory field artillery or anti-aircraft gun or anti-tank gun.
mm-hmm.
So there is a distinction. The slot is still shared, but there is a distinction between those unit types, which is a nice little tidbit to know. And then 0 to 3 of the same. So you can have basically up to 4 different guns of any variety and any flavor, and then transport or tow per unit of the platoon. So it does look like tows have snuck back in,
Yep.
but I suspect that I think the distinction is going to be very soft, just like, and perhaps softer than it is in V2, in the sense that, like, any transport can be a tow. It's just called a tow if it's an artillery unit, and it's called a transport if it's not.
Yeah, and there is a difference with how a tow essentially would disembark their artillery
Yeah,
or
yeah,
modern models. Like, I appreciate that that's a little bit different as well. Yeah, I did see this and went, oh, they dashed all the hopes that it's all the same. But look, it's also such a moot point that that it's fine. Um,
there is something a little interesting here, though, that again, I'm not sure how many people have gotten onto. The mandatory field artillery gun is section strength, 2 dots. The
mhm.
rest of them are half section strength, they're smaller. And so it's specifically this platoon that makes me think that the platoon commander is going to be um, an upgrade to a unit or attached to a unit. Um, and again, I don't have any proof of this. This is just interpretation.
But it is
The
interesting because
mm,
that. if you look at this platoon selected, it was like, well, what's the only difference between where those diagrams sit on the chart is the fact that one is mandatory and the other three are optional.
Yeah.
Um, and we it would I'm one I don't think there's enough scope to be able to say, oh, the French like the image below, for example, where it
Mm,
says the French light artillery teams. I
mm.
don't think there's enough scope to say that, oh, you're buying one artillery team with two weapons attached to it and then additional guns to support the team. I don't know if there's I don't know if there's
Ah,
enough to say that. Um,
interesting.
so you actually end up in a position where,
Right,
and
because
this
there's two guns,
there's
but
two
it's
guns,
only got the one
right?
caption. Now,
So
this is some real detective work here, Dan.
so now this also plays into my overarching statement, which we'll get to when we talk about the special rules as well.
I I
That
actually
I
think you're on the
think,
money.
well, and this is what I mean, like, because if I think about images you put in your rule book, you typically want what you're putting down as the images around army selection to not contradict your army selection. So there's one of
It's a
two
good rule of thumb.
scenarios. But there's one or two scenarios. Either the French light artillery team, maybe light artillery guns, have two guns attached as part of their selection,
Yeah, maybe that's the thing that
right?
makes French
Because
artillery
that's,
French artillery. Yeah,
yep.
sure.
So that's a possibility. The other possibility is that any artillery choice in that mandatory slot actually gets two guns as its base pickup, which
Mm.
is a very interesting approach.
Hmm.
Or it could be that they've got a really cool looking image and it actually doesn't matter, which is entirely possible as well. I have no basis to say otherwise.
Well,
But
see, I think this that would actually be really interesting because if artillery platoons weren't actually platoons, if it was just like a super section or a
yeah,
super order dice that you purchased that had a bunch of guns. Now, you might think, oh wow, you get to fire all of your guns at once. Sure, but they can all be pinned at once. Uh,
correct.
if it goes that way, right?
They could all be
The other,
targeted by an airstrike or something, like there's pros and
yep,
cons
yep,
with that group selection mentality of how to apply it to the units. But I did think it was
very
interesting that
interesting.
that yeah, that
The
image and the caption, because it doesn't talk
Yeah,
about teams in the selection, and so if the
yeah,
teams are actually in the army lists, we haven't seen those. So that was something I picked up.
and I think the main reason why I think you're 100% right, and sure, why not? I will. We're going to timestamp this, and we're all going to laugh at me when the rulebook comes out. Um, take the German Pioneer Squad on the left.
Yeah,
Why is there two captions instead of one?
100%, and that's what I was talking
I
about with possibly the squad
Yeah,
sizing.
I think you could hide one of those captions, probably the one in the middle, and it would not like make the picture look worse. It wouldn't make it unclear
Yep.
that there were two separate units or anything like this. So
So
yeah,
let me go one further because again,
the
I
just
have
before we go
looked.
into that,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
the main reason I thought it was section was you're going to see like the first one that you buy, you can buy additional crewmen for.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then you have like field gunners, right? That special rule where you can use those guys to replace other guns. Now
Yep,
that
yep.
becomes a moot point if you're buying a battery as a unit rather than like a collection of individual units. But yeah,
Yeah.
sorry to cut you off. You were
So there's two just straight off your point. If we look just above the artillery platoon selector boxes, it goes brackets AKA artillery battery, and
yeah.
that was the other piece that I went, maybe we're not buying one gun anymore. Um, Now the other part of where I started to pick this up a little bit on the unit sizing is all of the images of the units that sit under these platoons would match the mandatory unit structure, and with potentially like a couple of
Mm.
additions.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
I went, well, so maybe these are just minimum size engineer squads, in which case that's fine. There's just two of them. So that still holds true. Maybe they still get up to 12. The one part we don't know is, of
Mm.
course, how are those units now comprised? What actually is an engineer squad? We don't know that yet. So, but that's all right. We can move forward to the next two fun ones, and then I'm quite excited about these two.
Armored platoon. So one platoon command vehicle, and it can be from tank, tank destroyer, assault gun, self-propelled artillery, anti-aircraft vehicle, or armored car.
Mm-hmm.
And then one other vehicle from the same list: tank, tank destroyer, assault gun, self-propelled artillery,
Yep.
anti-aircraft vehicle, armored car. So that means like this is basically the two token armored slots you got in the current generic reinforced platoon. That's what
Yep.
this is.
Yep.
There is something I want to call out specifically here, and it has been clarified by Marcus, is that the platoon command vehicle, this must be a vehicle that has the command vehicle special rule or that has been given the rule from its entries option. If no such vehicle is available to the
Mm-hmm.
player,
Yep.
the vehicle can be given the command vehicle special rule at 10 points, even if its entry does not normally allow this option.
Yep.
This specifically means if you personally do not own a vehicle that contains the command special rule, you can add it to your model for 10 points.
Yes.
I
That's
suspect that some TOs are going to lean on this a little bit more leniently than others, and we won't know until we see the entire rulebook.
yeah.
But again, it's just like Warlord's going, hey man, I get it. You've probably got a Panzer IV and like a Puma, and you want to bring them both. And I think I've shot myself in the foot because I think the Puma has command vehicle. But anyway, um, and and it's like, yeah, you can't. Or you've got two Panzer IVs.
Yes.
They don't normally have command vehicle. I don't know if they will in V3, but you don't normally have command vehicle. That's cool. You can just add it for 10 points. Don't
Yep.
stress. Now you can play two Panzer IVs. Thank
And
you, Warlord.
that yeah, because it moves it into that space of okay, so I do have some form of structural command, which again to me reinforces that the platoon commanders are gonna do probably more than what we think. Um,
Yeah.
but also naturally on top of that, you turn it around and you go, okay, so if I'm in a position where I don't have a vehicle that would normally allow me to, oh wait, I can just take whatever I want and add 10 points to it if I want to play. Well, that streamlines my choices and my games and my ability to just play the game.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a very, very good thing, I think. Going up to the standard, again, the standard O3, the O3 vehicles for optional
Yep.
fits the O3 for everything else
Yep.
in the selection. So I kind of go, yeah, this actually sort of makes a bit of sense. Um, Forcing something to be a command vehicle as a HQ vehicle also, you know, makes sense in the rest of the structure.
Yeah.
They got
Also, historically, somebody's
also
got to be yelling at
historically
somebody else.
someone's in charge, right? Um, and so that was good to see because I feel that it also took out the infantry,
Mm.
the artillery, like it just kept it to go, no, this is about armor. That's it. You've got those choices, and there is enough in there that you shouldn't really need the extra stuff because that's what your other platoons are for. That was another streamlining of what a
Yeah.
tank war theater list thing looked like in comparison to the new structure. And
Yeah.
then we
Big fan. I can't argue any of that. The
love it.
Now we get into the Recce infantry platoon, which I think is probably the most interesting, and it's actually
This
the
is
one
cool.
I'm personally most excited about.
Yeah.
In terms of, well, actually, that's not true. As an individual platoon, this is the structure I'm most excited about.
Yep.
However, I'm actually just a big fan of, one rifle platoon and the heavy weapons platoon. I think that's because
Mm-hmm.
it's just a historical thing that happened, and that scratches the itch in such the right way.
Yep.
I'm getting sidetracked. Um, Recce infantry platoon, standard platoon commander, one infantry squad is the mandatory selection.
Yep.
Specifically, cannot have the engineer special rule. 0 to 3 infantry squads are optional. Again, not engineers. 0 to 1
Mm-hmm.
forward observer. Nice to see that you can get multiple in a list, at a base list. An additional optional anti tank team. And then there's a couple of caveats here that make the Recce infantry platoon so unique. Firstly, the platoon must include enough transport vehicles, soft skin or armored, to transport all models in the infantry units in the platoon.
Yep.
So this means bums and seats, just like the transport rules are now. It's not If you have a big transport that can fit the entire platoon, that's legitimate. You
Yep.
don't need a transport for every unit. Here's where it gets interesting. All these transport vehicles must have the Recce special rule or must be given the Recce special rule at 10 points, even if it does not normally allow this option. Now, that's
Yeah.
very cool.
Yep.
I would be mortified. I'm going to go with mortified if the Recce special rule is exactly the same as it is now, because that seems like an absolute headache for all players involved, and not in a good way. Not in like, oh, this is a tactical challenge, I don't know how to deal with this,
No,
but just
just a this is frustrating me beyond all belief. Um, I, I,
just
I,
no interactions.
yeah, I feel that, and Reki has some, I would say has some challenges around how it operates
Mm,
in the evolved game right
currently, yeah,
now.
yeah,
And that's it's there are certain parts of it that are really good, but there are certain parts that aren't particularly good with the way that it interacts with the game. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that something was done to streamline that interaction. Um,
yeah,
what I find what was really good to see is the next part of that caveat,
yeah,
which is then so only infantry units that are an exception to this are those that cannot have a transport vehicle, so cavalry or motorbikes. Now, to see that written in there, first of all, is just nice because we don't have to worry about that being an FAQ question that comes up. Um, but
I think
also,
the writing, yeah, sorry, the writing on that's very particular. The only
yeah,
infantry units that are an exception to this, comma, and which cannot have the transports vehicle, comma, are units
hmm
with cavalry or motorcycle special rule.
yep, yep. And so it again, on face value, without the rest of the rulebook, it's only an assumption that I'm taking here, but that should mean that cavalry and motorcycles still exist in some form, and we know
Mm,
motorcycles probably will from the special rule page. Um,
yep.
but it means that those units can actually be included in a reconnaissance infantry platoon doing a purpose that they probably would have done historically, which is being a reconnaissance scouting unit. So I also think saying that they then have to be mounted on the horses or motorcycles is sort of the tip on the cake to go, you can't just
Yeah.
take the dismounted version of these infantry.
Yeah. I
um,
yeah. So I don't know. I'm just very excited when we put these things together holistically. And so what does this actually mean in terms of army list composition? So
mm,
um we haven't gotten an official points limit for or a suggested points limit for the game. Marcus did say on the Juggernaut episode, I think it's 65. It's called Assuming. He did say that they have very recently been testing V3 at 1250.
mm,
So, what does that mean? Does that mean we should all be playing at 1250? We'll find out when the rulebook comes out. Um, but the actual army list composition is your army list has to contain one rifle platoon. So that was the first one that we went through.
yeah,
Having one rifle platoon allows you to have 0 to 1 heavy weapons and 0 to 1 engineers and 0 to 1 artillery platoons
yeah,
and 0 to 1 tank and 0 to 1 recce.
yeah,
If you want a duplicate of any one of the additional platoons, you have to have that many rifle platoons. But
yes,
again, if you have 2 rifle platoons, now you can have 0 to 2 heavy weapons, 0 to 2 engineer platoons, 0 to 2 artillery platoons, and so on.
mm.
That's great. That's super chill. I'm a big fan of that.
It just keeps it very like and look, we don't know what's going to happen in V3 in terms of min-maxing and whatever. Like obviously certain things will come up
Or
over
additional
time
selectors.
or
Yeah.
additional selectors, right? So we don't know what those things look like. However, to keep the base system as flexible as that, and then they go right. Okay, so you've got, as a hypothetical example again, it's like you've got your first rifle platoon of 1 platoon commander and 2 infantry squads. I take literally
Mhm.
nothing else. I take 5 Panthers. Okay, I go back and I take a platoon commander and 2 infantry squads. I take another 5 Panthers. Now that's a very unrealistic list, but it's very simple to actually even conceive whether or not you could do that. Whereas at the
Yeah,
moment, if I somehow wanted to put together a list that ran first of all, the Panthers would be simply too expensive to put 10 of them in anyway, and that's probably not going to change. But the reality is I can't make a list that simply with those extra elements, certainly across these other four platoon types, with the ease that
yeah.
this system allows. Um, and I love the
And
Recce infantry platoon. I love that that's in there as
very
an
cool
option.
idea. I I my main gripe, and I think it's actually a pretty substantial barrier to entry to a lot of new players, and I say this as a TO who's run like maybe somewhere between 6 to 12 events,
Mm,
and half of them geared specifically at new players, is that the current force selection is a bit of a barrier to entry to bolt action. The moment you step out of like generic reinforced platoon,
yeah,
it just becomes very complicated very quickly. And
yeah,
hopefully, or not hopefully, this 100% is much clearer and it's much more straightforward. And not only that, it's actually a simpler and clearer system that increases the depth and the strategic choices and the tactical choices that players can make without additional complexity. And that's the really difficult thing to achieve as a game designer,
yeah.
is to increase depth, that is like strategic thinking and tactical and skill expression and things like this, without adding a complicated mechanic, or without also increasing the steps and the admin and the bookkeeping and the clauses and the other sorts of stuff. This is elegant in all of the manifestations of that word. I'm a huge fan.
I think it.
The main,
Oh, you
go
go.
ahead.
I was just gonna say I really think that, and like I said, I'm a fan of trying to push things in a more historical setup kind of way where you have to compromise on what choices you take, and your armies are like the mixed bag army, which Bo commented on as well when he did one of his first consideration as reviews of the army
Yeah,
selectors. He was talking about that the mixed bag list is simply going to be um, potentially harder to rely on because in order to
yeah.
create the mixed bag approach, okay, so you're going to want an engineer platoon, an artillery platoon, a heavy weapon platoon. You obviously have to have a rifle platoon, and then you're going to want probably an armored platoon in there. Okay, well, if you're taking an armored platoon, you're immediately committing to two vehicles. Now, you have a lot of scope of what those vehicles are probably going to be. Um, okay, well, if we're taking an artillery platoon, well, hang on, for example, if I'm right in my suppositions around
Mm-hmm.
the artillery, it's like, oh, hang on, I'm actually buying an artillery battery. I'm not buying just a single
Mm-hmm.
gun. Or if you're talking
You're
about
buying
the
at least two
engineers,
guns.
buying probably at least two, or possibly at least two guns, I should say. Or you talk about the engineers, you go, oh, well, so if I'm going to buy two engineer squads. Oh, they're only 6 men strong. Like, like you suddenly have to. There's a lot more
Yeah,
compromise in those decisions now because you can't simply take a little bit here, a little bit there. You are gonna have to go.
bulk
Well,
out with infantry, call it
yep,
a day.
yep, or make the choice to go. Yeah, we do need to play a little bit bigger because I want to play with my toys. But in order to actually support that in a game, to make that element a little bit more hyper focused, maybe on achieving a task, it requires compromise in the list, and that's something which I
Mm.
feel certain bolt action lists that compromise is a lot easier to make than others.
Yeah.
Like I look at playing my Bulgarians at the moment, and
Mm.
in V2, like recently, I finally got access to flamethrowers thanks to the FAQ. That was amazing. I've got a couple of months of actually being able to have flamethrowers. Um, but the reality is that force is very heavily restricted as a minor nation, and I have
Mm-hmm.
to compromise what goes in and what goes out
Mm-hmm.
across the board. I simply don't have the same level of tools. Now, yes, it's a minor
Yeah.
nation, right? So you have the fact that it's not given as much focus as the big five, but you actually this list building system, pending anything else we see, obviously, but from a base level of you can all take this. You can all build
Mm-hmm.
around what this looks
Mm-hmm.
like, and then it's what you choose to compromise on, but you're probably going to have to compromise somewhere. Um, I also think that there's a very, very high level of replayability. Um,
Oh yeah.
like, I,
I
there,
mean, I need to go and buy more like 37 millimeter anti tank guns. The
Like
moment I saw
literally
this,
everything I know. Yeah. Um,
I'm glad I have at least one HMG team, and I think at last count 4 MMG teams.
mhm.
I'm so glad that they're actually in my collection,
Yeah.
and
My Marines are
I'm
going to be raring to go.
a paltry 3 mortar teams. I
Poultry.
only have 3, so that's something I will absolutely need to rectify. But I have at least 2 Shermans, so we're off to a good start.
Yeah.
I think just touching on your Minor Nations thing here, I think they in particular often end up with this kind of like mixed bag list just because
Yep.
you don't have the choice in your faction list.
Mhm.
Whereas if you end up with, I'm going to go ahead and call the infantry squads for recce units cavalry squads because that's basically what they are.
Yeah.
Not in cavalry in terms of like mounted on horses, but cavalry in terms of actually no, they work cavalry in all interpretations, including horse and mechanized and motorized cavalry,
Yeah.
because they're all recce or they're all cavalry. Um, yeah, I mean, wow, so elegant. Uh, if at least one of your squads gets flagged as a cavalry section, whether that's mounted or mounted on horse or mounted in a truck or whatever,
Mm.
then you can have that. And now you can theme your minor nation force to be a reconnaissance infantry platoon with very little difficulty. And
Yeah.
that's super cool.
Yeah.
Um, I think you're very right in the sense that if you want a mixed bag list, you're going to come up just uh, fish or fowl. You're not going to have enough infantry to do anything. You're not going to have enough artillery to
Yep.
blow somebody off the table. You're not going to have enough armor to do all the things you need to do with armor. Um, on the other hand, though, if you just try not to do everything, if you only try to do a couple of things really well, and it is a 1250 point game, I get the feeling you're going to have a really like nice force that is very capable in a few areas that
Mhm.
has some obvious deficits, but I think because of what we're seeing that those deficits are not going to cost you the game at list building like other wargaming systems can.
Yeah. And I think the flip side as well is obviously your opponent's going through exactly the same thing, and so
Mm-hmm.
there this has the potential to turn into a game of you can only do so much at the list building stage until you know who you're going to match up against, and then it's a case of like, right, I have a a list type A, you've got a list type B, I've got the artillery, you've taken the armored, um, and obviously some of the other pieces might flex around that, and it's like, right, so how do I best fight your components of that artillery platoon to maximize what my tanks want to do? Because obviously that could be a direct counter. I'd say could be because I don't know, um, but we end up
I
in a
do. I
much
have the data.
yeah, I know, but we end up in a much more um, a tactile meta game naturally, rather than going. For example, it's like, okay, so you've got a T-34 Soviet tractor factory list where you've got 3 inexperienced but hard to hurt T-34s for a normal sort of 1,000 point force. Um, if I'm not equipped to kill 3 9+ vehicles with my list, I'm in a lot of trouble. That's almost
Right.
an unsurmountable challenge. Whereas I think we're going to end up with a lot more. Well, yes, you've got an advantage there, but my advantage is actually here. Where is the cogs that I need to move and turn and everything like that? And that's hard to judge without the full set of rules. But
And until you've played it,
until you've
and
played it,
yeah, yeah,
I'll be doing
yeah,
it for a long time trying to go, how does this cog work? But I think certainly from a list selection point of view, and of all the possible directions they could have taken it, and there were many, I'm actually quite excited about this one.
yeah. I look. A lot of the things that you have said are things that I was trying to achieve with Band of Brothers,
Yeah.
um, and I'm going to go ahead and take full credit here that I had inspired this platoon structure. Of course, that's absolute horseshit, and I don't genuinely believe that. But nevertheless, I'm going to go ahead and take full credit here that this is inspired by the absolute drivel that I cock up and cotton and concoct in my players packs for all of you. I
I love it.
the but like jokes aside, when I looked at this, the first thing that I thought was like, man, Band of Brothers is going to be so cool if I break these rules about like if I say no, like your one of your players has a rifle platoon that's mandatory, and but
Yeah,
can't take this other platoon. Your or these two other platoons. Your one of your other players has the armor platoon as mandatory, and they can't take these other two platoons. It just, it's going to be Band of Brothers is going to come back with a V3 vengeance,
yep,
and it's going to knock everybody's socks off.
yeah. No,
That
it's
all
gonna be good.
aside, just I suppose touching on tournaments and this composition, there is one thing in this article that I think is very important to mention is that Warlord says that this forms like the base army composition, and that there will be guidelines about what should be done in like tournament and competitive environments.
Yep.
The strong caveat with that, and if you've seen our interview with Marcus, you'll absolutely understand where this comes from, is that they have no interest in telling people how to play with their toy soldiers. That's not what they do. That's not what they like to do. But there will be guidelines about what army list compositions should look like for like a baseline competitive tournament. And I suspect that it's very hard to say without actually reading the rules, but I would not be surprised if it's like a limit of 0 to 1 of the auxiliary platoons.
Yeah. Or maybe they do like a global maximum of 4 platoons, which means you can only ever double up
Oh
one
yeah,
of them,
yeah,
you know?
yeah.
So,
Oh yeah, that's a good idea.
yeah, so I've seen that one bantered around a little bit where people are going, oh look, I'm just simply not gonna probably not gonna allow the multiple sets of spamming stuff.
Mm.
But even and whilst certainly with what we're presented at the moment, there's some value in that approach. I think you can only ever hold it in assumption until we get the rules and actually get to grips with it, because it may be that there are other mechanics in play that like everyone's oh no, I shouldn't say everyone, that's too generalizing. Some people have gone, oh my goodness, I can take 3 multiple rocket launchers in the heavy weapons platoon, plus I can double down and put 2 of them automatically in an armored platoon and have like 5 ready to go for like no minimal cost essentially, because and previously people would be upset when they saw 2 of them, and now you allow me to take 5. And the big thing with that, which is again this ambiguous question, is then, well, first of all, you're assuming that multiple rocket launchers work the same and that they're going to be the same cost. Neither of those things are actually confirmed in anything that we've seen so far, and they're a known pain point for the for the rule set. So that may not be the way it goes. um,
Yeah, I would be very surprised if it is.
um,
Now moving on
we
to,
should go to the unit rules.
yeah, and also the preview pages from the rulebook. So if you go to the rulebook on the website, you can see that there is a couple of preview pages. What have we got? One, two, three, four,
For
five. We got
we got
eight basically, but
eight
two of them
sets.
is
Yeah,
just a
yeah.
map. So you've basically got 6 pages,
I do like that
or
map though.
three.
That's a pretty map.
Oh yeah, or at least three double spreads. Uh, Zooming in is going to be
It's a bit of a
uh,
challenge.
confronting. Yeah, let's go with confronting. I think, yeah, as I said, I think my toaster took this photo. Um, so some things that are important to note here. Uh, we got page 61, Conventions of War, which is something that we've seen before. Um, there is a section that talks about line of sight through ruins and looking over stuff, and that seems to be the diagram looks like it's a redrawing, but it looks like the same one that's in second edition.
Mm,
Um,
pretty close to
and
it.
there is a mention of counts as cover, either soft or hard, on page XX. So it
Yeah,
doesn't actually give a page number. So it might be that we don't actually have a full, like this might actually not be the final version of that page.
yeah, and that's probably something that we'll see it in the other special rules as well. There's a lot of the prior reference page numbers that it's sort of pointing to in the book, whilst we have prospective
Mm.
page numbers down the bottom. Um, it's Like they're not going to publish a book that says reference this page XX. So clearly this is some form of markup copy, and it might be very, 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 very close to what it's going to get published, or it
Or
might
it could
be,
be the final copy just sanitized for this
yep,
exact image.
yep, 100%. And they could have had this ready to go for when they were going to do this marketing strategy, which is great. I love it. So I think there's still an element of they're trying to keep certain things under wraps appropriately. It's their product. But yeah, you'll see that most of the page numbers that they're trying to reference naturally don't reference anywhere. They reference XX as redacted
Yeah.
information.
There, there is a spot here about rerolls, and it's all the standard rules that you would expect. If you re-roll a dice, you have to accept the second result, and you can't re-roll a re-roll. I don't really remember that being in the second edition rulebook, but I think it's just because it's a very standard wargaming conventional rule about rerolls, and bolt action doesn't have a lot of rerolls built in. So I don't necessarily read that paragraph and go, oh my god, there's going to be so many rerolls in bolt action.
No,
Just in case anybody was
I
thinking
think
that.
I think it's much more, and I could be wrong, but it feels like it's much more a generic statement that if something
Yeah.
calls you to do a re-roll, you have to re-roll it and you have to abide by this. Well, sorry, you have to re-roll a failure or whatever the trigger is, but then you must accept the second result. You can't switch back. So that might just be saying that, maybe something gets a re-roll on the penetration value, or maybe something gets a re-roll on the hit and you can't,
Mm.
change its
Mm-hmm.
impact back and
Mm-hmm.
forth.
Mm-hmm.
If you've played war games for any amount of time, especially a Games Workshop system, rerolls should excessive rerolls is obviously maybe not where you want to go, but how a reroll works is
Yeah.
a fairly standardized process.
I think interestingly, again, just leading into some things to not expect revolt action, there was no mention of modifiers in that
Hmm.
rule.
Yep.
So again, I would not expect modifiers to dice rolls to be a consistent experience in bolt action either. Um, and you might think, oh, that's a really weird thing to cotton onto. It's like, well, if you were able to reroll dice at even a mediocre frequency, doing it before or after applying modifiers is actually really important to
Yep.
the statistics and the probability and the efficiency of that reroll. And to see that not mentioned in there, I think just should waylay a lot of this fear mongering that this is just turning into 40k. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I
but
don't.
I
It's not
suppose
going to be 40k.
I suppose these are the boring parts of the pages, but I think are worth mentioning. Engineers is the first special rule that we've got, and we hinted at this a fair bit earlier. Units of engineers are equipped with explosives and other specialized gear for destroying battlefield fortifications and defenses. To represent this, when a unit of engineers assaults a building, the defenders cannot claim benefit from the defensive position bonus. In addition, engineers have several advantages when it comes to the rules for minefields and other fortifications. I think comes when it comes to the rules for clearing other. Yeah. So that's really interesting that the engineer special rule is now consistent.
Yeah.
And it seems to be that this is an excerpt from what we're going to call, what we'll throw back to universal special rules, quote
Yeah.
unquote, from previous and or current editions of and or other war games. Um, so yeah, I think there's going to be a fairly hefty section in here that is consolidating all of the versions of the different special rules we saw from the multitude of campaign books.
Yeah.
This actually makes engineers a pretty interesting unit,
And this
even
is
without
what
a
I
fight.
was yeah, and this is what I was hinting at a little bit before when saying that you're possibly not going to see engineers just being used as a flamer mob, because now they're actually able to negate if the simultaneous combats in cover is still remains, if and that doesn't change too much. um, your ability to negate those advantages of defensive location is quite critical. If the attacker still
Mm,
strikes first and the attacker still gets kills before the defender can strike, and so the terrain would normally be a like a standard bulk standard way of
reliable, yeah.
reliably saying no, we're going to fight at the same time. I'm going to fight you hard. Engineers being able to go, cool story. Here's a Bangalore. Like that's something that is very different to how you use them now. Um,
Yes.
it also potentially with the things like Soviet engineers with their body armor, suddenly that becomes a very, very different type of unit because you're not
Yeah.
just relying on the flamer. It's like, no, these guys are going to come up and just like punch you in the face, and
They're
it
going to
won't
dig you
matter
out
if
of
you're
that terrain, and
it
there's
won't
nothing you
matter.
can do about it.
And they suddenly become like, if I look at how that would have worked, so you get the charge, you get to do the assault, you get the ability to strike first because you're negating their advantage, and then whatever lives still has to hurt you on sixes in combat if all other things remained equal in that scenario from V2.
Yeah.
Oh, well, body engineer, the
Body armor
body armored
engineers. Yeah.
engineers, like that's a very dangerous like situation to suddenly get caught in. And yes, there's if everything stayed the same, there's all the movement penalties and everything like that. I get it, and we still don't know those things or the points costs either. However, you're now talking about well, forget the Soviet engineers part of that with the body armor. Like
Mm.
just a unit to be able to do that in general
Mm-hmm.
is
Mm-hmm.
very attractive. Like I need
Mm-hmm.
to be able to get stuff out of combat. We'll send the engineers in. How many have you got? Minimum two, if I took any. Minimum
Exactly.
two units.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's gonna make taking ground. You're gonna have a specific tool that it's gonna enable you to take ground. That doesn't mean just shooting it with howitzers until it's dead and then walking on where that unit was.
that's yep. Yep, that's right. The reliance on HE suddenly becomes not as much of a problem because you have another tool in the toolbox.
Yeah.
Um,
I think one thing I want to touch on here before I lose this thread in my head. Um, One of the main features, I'm going to go with features, of bolt action is the way that the objectives are scored. They're only ever scored at the end of the game. That means, unfortunately, the most efficient lists are ones that can kill your opponent the best. That's a huge part of the meta at the moment.
yeah,
And it, unfortunately, for those who are trying to get better at bolt action V2 and you've only just gotten onto that, you have twilight hours where you're going to be amazing and you're going to wreck face. But the key is you just delete your opponent before they can score any objectives. So you just bring the killiest units, and you can see that a lot, particularly in the European metas, in the UK and that sort of stuff. Just spamming Lorraine Schleppers and that sort of thing. If, and this is a complete guess, if the objectives switch to scoring during the game or have some other criteria like that, suddenly this unit of engineers becomes extremely helpful because you can, if you have a unit in a building on an objective, you can dig them out quite reliably out of this position. I think combat, broadly speaking, is going to work more or less the same, and it's the actual next rule Fanatics that makes me think that. So
yep, yep.
for those who know and love Fnatic, I hope you're sitting down for this because the rule's getting a bit of a change.
Just a
So
little.
the the thing is, you're now forced to take a morale check if you take half casualties, uh, but you ignore the pins. So you basically, the first part of Fnatic is stubborn. So stubborn get folded in. If Fnatic units are, and it also says remember that auto tests are not morale checks and they are therefore modified as normal.
Yep.
So both of those two mechanics exist as we know them, or in a very similar fashion, and that
Yep.
there is going to be a leadership / morale value attached. Fnatic
Mm-hmm.
units with at least 2 men left are not routed and destroyed when the number of pin markers is equal to or higher than morale value. Of course, such unit is not very likely to be able to do anything until it manages to rally.
Yep. And that's and
Yeah,
then the next part as well. When a Fanatics unit is defeated in close quarters fighting, the fight counts as a
yeah,
draw instead of it, and
yeah,
another round is immediately fought. Which that's very similar to the current.
yeah.
And then when they drop below one, they get destroyed. That's very similar. And
Actually, when they drop 2-1, they are defeated.
2-1. Sorry, yes, 2-1.
Yeah, so that last man doesn't fight,
No,
which
and that's the same as
yeah.
current. Um, but
So there are
yes,
some clues there that combat works the same way in terms of lethality.
yep.
I was personally hoping to see something that you might see from like rank and flank games, where if you lose the combat, rather than like being immediately wiped out, your unit is forced to retreat.
Mm.
Um, whether or not they pass or fail a morale check.
Yep.
So that might actually be in there, in the sense that if your unit like loses and it fails its morale check, um, it'll just be deleted. If it loses and passes its morale check, it might flee. This is total. This isn't even speculation at this point. This is just a wish list. I would like that to be a mechanic, because I think that that is a little bit more interesting, in the sense that, like, if your unit fails uh, the combat, but they still maintain unit cohesion, they can actually retreat and kind of regroup at a distance later. But as I said, this is a wish list that I have. There's not even like an inkling that that rule is changing.
No. I mean,
Um,
it's I like that part of the wish list because it also removes an element of reliability that has been in close combat in V2. Um,
mm,
and I think that would actually be good for the game as much as it would slightly slow down the combat phase. The reality is, I actually think that would be a better gaming experience. It's always like when you get shot at and your unit gets wiped out, you go, well, okay, yeah, I did get hit by something really big and it killed like the attack killed like 6 or 7 guys. It's like when it's in combat and you like that feels bad moment of I lost one guy and didn't kill anybody back and now my unit's wiped out. Like
my elite
those
unit of like
my
bulletproof
elite,
dudes.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
like those are the circumstances where I'm like, oh, I feel like there's like this doesn't feel right. Not saying that it
yeah,
didn't happen, but yeah,
yeah,
it doesn't feel right for the game. But look, it's fine. I can live with it where the way it is. But I
yeah.
like your wish list.
Fieldcraft. Nice to see that this is a consistent rule now.
It's also quite a
Basically, yeah, yeah. Rough ground gets treated as open ground,
yeah, like
which nice and
that's
simple, straightforward.
depending on which units have that. Like there are certain ones immediately that jump to mind that probably will,
Yeah.
but that's a solid rule. Like being able to move effectively
Mm-hmm,
over
mm-hmm,
ground is
mm-hmm.
no small thing.
I would um there's a couple of thoughts I will share about kind of the special rules writ large when we get to the end.
Hmm.
But one thing that I would hang my hat on is that units with specific combinations of special rules are the things that are going to be very good in bolt action. I don't know if this exists, but imagine a unit of engineers with fieldcraft.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I think if that does exist and they don't have some other sort of drawback attached to it in some other way, like engineers with fieldcraft but
Mm,
shirkers are a lot less scary. Um, but I do think that you're right that the combination of rules will start to show, and then people got to learn how to use the unit itself, obviously in
yeah, yeah,
game
yeah,
as well.
yeah.
But I do think that those things will probably have a leg up over the bulk standard. What we may find, however, is that the units that have those combinations, potentially few and far between, but may also have not as effective weaponry or very effective weaponry, but very
Mm,
small unit sizes. So they're
mhm.
again, if we move into that, yes, it happened, but you didn't have like company level infiltration like the Panzer 150 brigade all the
Yeah,
time. That wasn't the standard mode of
yeah.
operation. Those things are there, but I do think, yeah, there's a few here, and we'll touch on the next couple that are on the pages here, that even with what's on the page, if they combine some of those things, it's like, oh, that's a fairly tough looking prospect.
Speaking of things that aren't tough, green got chilled out a little bit.
Yeah,
So,
this
so the green rule is currently V2. Um, your unit has a morale value of 8. The first time they take a casualty, you roll a d6. On a 5 or 6, that unit is now regular. On a 1, that unit cops d6 pins, and you don't get to test again for the rest of the game. Um, this changed it now, so they only upgrade on a 6.
yeah,
So you have an equal chance of being really good and being really bad, and most of the time, nothing's going to happen.
yeah, I'm actually
There
in
is,
favor of this one.
yeah, I think so too. Green was just a little bit too much bang for your buck. 1 in
Yeah.
3 chance of upgrading, 1 in 6 chance of being awful, and then 2 out of 6 chance of nothing happening.
You just got what
It's
you
a
paid
little
for.
well, you didn't pay for the rule; it was usually free. There is something in here that is appears to be a little bit repetitive, and this is something that the Juggernaut's caught on to as well. So I'm just might be rehashing an idea here, but they say raw troops are usually inexperienced with a morale value of 8. That particular phrase, inexperienced with a morale value of 8, is
Mm,
repeated, and then at the end it says regular with a morale value of 9 is repeated, is stated at the end of the paragraph. Now, that could be explicit and thorough, and that's the end of the conversation. Or it could be that morale value and unit rating could be separated, that you might get an inexperienced unit that has a morale value of 9, or a regular unit with a morale value of 8. I have, again, absolutely no evidence of this. I suspect that because of the tome that the FAQ and the errata tend into, I suspect that then this is being very explicit and clear.
yeah.
And they also make a note that the green test happens after you do a morale check, or after you would do a morale check if you need to do one in the shooting procedure, which suggests that the morale check is normally the end of the shooting procedure. And it also clarifies that it's not the first model that's slain, it's after you have resolved the first instance of casualties for that unit in its totality, then you decide whether or not the unit upgrades.
Yeah.
All that being said, I think green is just not as good as it is, which I think is a good thing because it was just a little too efficient.
Yeah, and that's what, like, I'm in favor of this change because like if green was 1-2, you take the D6 pins and go down 3-4, nothing happens, 5-6, you get upgraded. I would have been okay with that. I don't think that would have been the right way to modify it, but it again,
Mm.
it keeps that probability approximately the same. I do think the 1 and the 6, um, the two extremes of that die roll, so you're going to have probably a good 70% of the time, quite comfortably, you're going to get the 2, 3, 4, 5, and you're not really going to get any further impact. It makes them
66% of the time. Yeah.
well, yeah. I did say approximately. I should know better than that when Gorchin's on the call, um, but I do think that because of where we often found the rule green on units, um, like some of them were exceptionally good, and so the free rifle squad for Soviets is an immediate one that I think of. Not only did I not pay for the unit at all, but they could actually become a very
A
effective
regular unit.
unit of
Yeah.
regulars that I also did not pay for. And I know that a lot of people, certainly in our scene over the years, have been like, I hate that squad. Like, I just hate the fact that you get a free squad that suddenly becomes regulars, 12 men that just suddenly appear on an objective. And so I think, minimizing their ability to go, well, they're probably going to stay inexperienced for most of the game. Um, that's actually okay. Like,
Yeah.
I'm okay with that change because my
It
opinion
does allow
matters.
for bolt action to happen, and that all
Yes.
4 of your green units get upgraded.
Yeah.
Uh, but
Bring it on.
and that's bolt action for you. It's why we love the game.
Yeah.
The next unit is one that has boiled quite a few bloods. It's called Infiltrator. This unit covers both small units trained to deploy ahead of the main force, like scouts, as well as snipers and other small units, suggesting forward deployment is still a mechanic.
Hmm.
If the unit takes a cover save, while it does not have an advance or run order dice on it, it receives an additional +1 to the roll. In addition, the unit might benefit from special deployment rules as detailed in the scenario being played, page XX. So, a lot to unpack there. Let's work backwards. Special deployment rules for the scenario. So that indicates, that to me says forward deployment is not going to be a separate special rule. It's going to be like infiltrators can deploy in this area of this scenario, which I think is a really nice way to tidy that up.
Yep.
The part that cooked a lot of people and raised a few blood pressures was the phrase, uh, if a unit takes a cover save.
Yep.
So it seems like cover saves are a thing in bolt action. I've seen a couple of different interpretations of this. The first one is that the wounding roll, as we know it, is getting renamed to the cover save. That doesn't really gel with the wording here. And it is a little bit of a throwback to, I want to say, second edition Flames of War, or it might be just one of the core mechanics of Flames of War, where you roll the hit is based on your unit and your ability to kill is based on the opponent unit's veterancy.
Yep.
Which again is basically how it works in bolt action, but who rolled it was kind of a thing. My read on this is that it's like an additional roll, but I don't think it's always present. I think it's only when the unit is in cover.
Yeah. See, let's see about this. Um, so if the unit takes a cover save, okay. So fundamentally, in order for it to be able to take a cover save of some description and function has to exist. It's also only allowed to take that cover save if it did not take an advance or a run order on it, which means
Mm-hmm.
you are potentially, as a reaction, hitting the deck with a
Mm.
down order and using a cover save. Now
Mm.
that is something that, so maybe the to hit modifier for down is being replaced with a cover save if you're in terrain. Um,
Nice.
yes, so because I struggle to see
Or
the
you get like a, I don't know, you get like a 6 out in the open, right? So you have a chance of
yes,
staying alive,
yeah, so
and then
you get those miraculous bolt action happen rolls, right? Um, but I think
really
because
good.
if it was just going to be cover saves in general, a la fifth edition 40k as I knew it from way back when, you'd be getting that cover save irrespective of whether you moved or not. It would be
Yeah,
dependent on whether you're
yeah.
in terrain. But that's actually not what the restriction is. The restriction is whether you've got a dice order assigned and whether you were moving on that dice order. So,
And you were eligible to take a cover save in the
and you were
first place.
eligible to take a cover save in the first place. So, I actually think my inference is that you, if you have, so my inference is actually twofold. One, reactions about going down will change, and it's actually
Mm-hmm.
about you
Mm-hmm.
will end up being able to take some form of mitigating damage through a cover save if you're in terrain. If you are an
At least.
infiltrate, at least, if you are an infiltrator unit, you then get an additional +1 to that roll. So you actually want your infiltrators to be more reactive and not moving, which is a very different role to simply what you would do. Like if you put it in the context of a sniper,
Yeah.
well, if your sniper's
Yeah.
getting shot at first, and putting aside that snipers ignore cover when they're being shot at from a sniper, but let's say a unit is
Yeah. Yeah.
shooting at a
Yeah. Yeah.
sniper has infiltrated, it's forward deployed, I have not advanced, I have not moved, I'm eligible to take a reaction, I choose to go down, that entitles to me to a cover save to any damage because they can't see me.
Mm.
Now that I actually think it is situational, which means you're not adding a dice roll every single time you shoot, but
Yeah.
it's very thematic to what you would do when you're in cover.
And I think there's a couple of things here that people are glossing over, and I
Mm.
think they're kind of missing. So the first knee jerk reaction is like they're getting rid of hit modifiers because there's cover now, and like I don't know that anybody can actually say this. Um, what I think we will see, and this would actually be interesting if it plays out, is that you're going to see fewer hit modifiers, not zero, but you're going to see fewer hit modifiers. So units are going to be more readily pinned,
Mm.
and you're going to see cover saves from units that are stationary and firing. Now, why does that matter? It's like, well, think about all of your fixed weapon teams now. You're going
Yeah.
to stick a medium machine gun team behind a wall in a bush or whatever where it's going to get some cover. And let's say it doesn't affect their hit modifier. Just humor me, right? Let's say whatever the situation is, it doesn't affect their hit modifier. But let's say, I don't know, fixed weapon teams, let's say medium machine gun teams get like a +2 cover save. I don't know. I'm just pulling numbers out here. This means now your MMG team is readily suppressible, right? So if somebody targets it, they can make that machine gun team less effective by pinning it more reliably. However, they can't kill the unit reliably. They can't kill models of that unit reliably.
Yes.
And so now you actually end up with a really interesting dynamic where you can pin units to enable other units to move around them
Correct. And
without
that.
actually. And in bolt action, right now, the way that it works is that if you were damaging a unit, you were pinning it.
Mm,
Whereas
yep.
now you can, now by separating those two things in some specific circumstances, you can actually suppress units without being in a position to damage them
Yep.
or reliably damage them. So I think that's really interesting.
And
You
I
know,
think there is, if, because again, whilst we are inferring here, I like where that is going, because then you go, okay, so what would be one of the primary purposes that I'd want to use all my MGs for? Well, actually,
exactly.
it's not about the kills anymore. It's about simply suppressing and holding the enemy back so that they can't
Fixing
advance
them.
well.
Yeah.
And that suddenly go like what one of the things that we've always sort of thought about MGs. Oh, MGs were used to like keep everyone's heads down and to like yes, there was the moments where they were being charged into and they cut down heaps of troops. Obviously, the D-Day landing is obviously an example of that.
Downed by a sniper and yeah.
Yeah, but that's it. But the thing is, the primary purpose was okay. So we're going to lock down that area so that they don't want to move, that they actually just don't want to run into the machine gun. Um,
and and it actually solves a problem that we've theory crafted
mm,
exists right now in V2. If you want to make a machine gun more effective, you also make it more lethal
yeah,
at the same time. What a cover save provides a designer of a game is a allows them to separate suppression from lethality.
yep,
Now there are going to be some weapons where those two things should be inextricably linked,
mm,
like high caliber explosive weapons,
yep,
100%. But there are going to be situations like a machine gun where it's if you're behind a brick wall and or in a bunker, the chance of that machine gun actually hurting you is not very high, and your ability to operate effectively in contest with a machine gun that's trying to suppress you is going to come down your tactics training. And right now in bolt action, that V2 specifically, it doesn't flow that way. That's not what you see playing out. Whereas I think a cover save enables that. Now
yeah.
imagine if you have what about gun shield? What if gun shield gives you a cover save always?
That was something else that I thought of. Is so gun shield previously was, um, it never affected the hit modifiers or the ability to
Mm-hmm.
stop any damage. It was simply that um, it increased your score to cause damage. And I gotta be honest, in the current version V2 bolt action, the way that you deal with a gun shield is by not shooting through it. You use counter battery fire, or
You run around
you
it.
flank
Yeah.
and run around it. And um, so to put it now, the gun shield may still end up with some sort of an arc that it's got to be in, so the strategy may still be run
Believably,
around
yeah.
it, right? But but against all the other sort of pot shots that were taken, where you would suddenly get, oh well, I've gone from a 4 to a 5 as my kill ratio from regular to veteran. That doesn't necessarily do a lot, but then you can go, well, I'm going to hurt you on 4s, but maybe on a 5 plus, I actually end up hitting the gun shield or whatever this cover save thing turns
Mm.
into.
Mm-hmm.
Then you go, all gun shields are good. Like gun shields are actually good. And you end up, I want to protect the, and especially if you're taking multiple guns in those batteries,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you're probably going to be in a position where you can overlap some of those arcs, and so you actually have some protection. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a very and again, hyperbole from myself, but that is a very interesting concept if they've brought that in, because it's not a hard mechanic to have considered in that space. So yeah,
Yeah,
I think there's a lot in that infiltrator rule that firstly talks to itself, but also
we can
it does
infer.
raise some questions that we might go, oh, this could go a very interesting direction. I do think
Yeah.
the reactions system might get changed in some way, and that
We've said it before, and I'll say it again. Just take the reactions from Conflict 47.
yeah, I know, right?
It's a great
um,
system. It's so
um,
good.
so we could yeah we could see something like that come forward, and that also, like like when Jacob and I talked about what are the things that we could potentially do to change the game up, and one of those was
Mm,
when you do an advance order, you give the option to shoot and then advance as opposed to move and
yeah,
then shoot, and it's it's situational, but that very much gives you the ability to play the game in a
can be
different
quite
way.
powerful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is a
I,
good thing.
at the risk of us getting stuck on here, let's
Yeah.
say you end up with, let's say you get fire as a reaction possibility, right? So we're not just going down. Um, and now you have a unit that advances forward and tries to suppress the opponent, and this unit, let's say machine gun position, an infantry squad advancing in a machine gun position, not a it's a fairly common thing that needs to happen every now and again. You have to get rid of the machine gun somehow.
Yep.
They advance on a machine gun position, they're moving forward and they're firing, and even if they stop at a wall, they won't have a cover save, but the machine gun does. And let's say the
Yes.
machine gun can react by firing. Now you actually have a firefight that the machine gun is likely to win,
Yes.
which right now in bolt action,
There's no way
not,
knowing they would.
not, no, not really. And I think that's the key thing that I think a lot of people are missing is what these interactions mean. And even if you don't have the reaction system and let's say that happens over two order dice. I activate an order dice, I walk forward, I try to shoot one of your Romanian or sorry, you're one of your Bulgarian machine gun teams, squad of riflemen, 10 shots, whatever, hitting on fours, all the good stuff that we know and love. And then you get your cover save. Maybe I put a pin on you. You activate, you return fire, and suddenly I'm not in cover.
Yeah. Yep.
You're gonna absolutely gun me down. But I think we've put all of the nails in that coffin.
Yeah.
Motorcycles are back as we know them. They are an infantry special rule by the reading of this. This looks like
Hmm.
infantry special rules.
Yep.
Um, there's no inkling of an armored car version of a motorcycle, which is great because,
Not in this text anyway.
yeah, yeah, because I think having a unit that exists in like a Schrodinger's unit slot is not great. I'm glad if it does, if we do end up with, infantry motorcycles and armored car motorcycles, and there's not a very like clear, strong distinction between them two, I think that's just a missed opportunity. I'm just going to call a spade a spade. That I personally don't think that should continue to V3. But the motorcycle rule for infantry here is as you know it. Um, there's not, I can't find any differences here.
No, I couldn't see anything that was different, and even things like uh, the escape reaction, and that still seems to be mentioned.
It is kind of
S-
interesting though. This is where I have to eat my own hat. Motorcycles, if they are assaulted, they make an immediate escape moves as for other recce vehicles. So it does
mm,
seem like recce and escape moves are
are
in
still
there
a
as
thing.
and they're in tandem. Um,
Yeah,
so
and
yeah, I guess all those transports are going to escape around the board.
which when you think about the purpose of that, what's going to sit in those reconnaissance platoons, that may not necessarily um, be too
Very
much of an
thematic.
issue, right? And it's yeah, they're going to try and get out of Dodge. We also, and well, one of the other things we're going to talk about after the special rules will probably be pertinent to that as well. Um, yeah, so I mean, they've also the motorcycles again have the same challenge that they can't shoot whilst they're moving, because
Hmm.
they're being considered an infantry transported vehicle essentially.
Yeah.
Um, sorry, infantry transported in a vehicle. Um,
Hmm.
and so they can only fire when they're stationary with a fire order. And yeah, so that's also not different. That's the same. A lot of people want to be able to fire on their motorcycles because they've seen Terminator and thought it looked cool. Um, it's I don't think that the transporting components of those forces, you didn't fight from the motorcycle because the motorcycle has no cover. Uh, you, you got off and you disembarked into cover to then fight if you had to. But again, they were reconnaissance troops. They weren't frontline assault troops.
The last special rule we have here is shirkers are back
Hmm.
as we know and love them. Um, I did like that they clarified what the pin markers count for.
Yes.
They said always count pin markers as double for auto test morale checks, routing, and so on.
Yep. Literally
And they
everything.
must always take an order test when given an order, even when they are not pinned.
Yep.
I don't know who genuinely believed that order tests, pinning, and order dice were not going to be in version 3. I think there was some brouhaha that like pinning and morale tests were not going to be part of the game.
Yeah,
For I
really.
don't know who genuine. Yeah, I'm concerned at how many Facebook comments I saw that suggested this. Um, but what can we actually confirm from this? There's an advance, there's a run, there's a down order, um,
There's still a rally
and a
order.
rally,
Yep.
and a rally. We haven't explicitly seen a fire order mentioned.
Uh, yes, you
Um,
do in
oh
the
yes, with a fire action.
motorcycles
Yep,
with the
I can
fire
see that.
action. Yep.
Um, so what are we missing? Advance, run, fire,
Ambush.
down. Rally. Yeah, ambush. Ambush is the only one that's not mentioned.
So
I don't think that means it's not on the dice.
no, no.
I
I
would,
think
I would be horrified if they said, "Yeah, we don't want to invalidate your models. We're going to give you all of these rules.
and then we're
Some of
gonna
them are going to be
invalidate your
free.
dice.
If you buy a starter set, we will give you a second free rulebook that's up to date. You know, all of this, and then they just go, no, you have to get new order dice. That doesn't sound like Warlord
Oh
at
man.
all.
Oh, that would be such
All.
a dog move.
Yeah,
It's
yeah. I think there's plenty of other companies that would probably do something like that, but I think that's the wargaming company that's won customer service like of the year for like many years in a row is not going to do it. And also, like, come on, you've heard Marcus. He's been on the show. He's a good guy. He wouldn't do that to you.
no,
So yeah,
no.
everybody rest assured that the totality of your collection is still going to be valid.
We also have
Um,
the advantage this edition that even if they were like, oh, we're going to go back to square edge dice, yeah, well V1 was square edge, so we still can use all those. Like we
th-
can't get sucker punch with round edges this time.
Nobody believes that that's actually occurring. Okay, that was just Dan being hyperbolic. Okay, they're not changing the order dice. Nobody, they're not changing the order dice. All right, so we've gone through the army composition rules. We've gone through the special rules. There's one last little tidbit here
Mm,
that I think is important for us to cover, and that is one of the unit cards that came up. Um, so this is, I think,
it's on the
ooh, I
Greyhound.
actually don't have. Yeah, I actually don't have that. Um, the
I'm
unit
bringing
card.
it up. So here's the M20 Scout card, and then we should be able to zip across. It's not on that one.
That's cool. You can just talk us through it, Dan. I have faith.
Yeah, all right. I won't bother searching for it because people have already been listening for almost 2 hours. So
And
on
I'll just whack it
the
on.
yeah. So on the Greyhound unit card. So we just if you bought a bolt action vehicle of one of their more recent sets since V2 came out, you would have got damage markers, a unit card associated with that, which has the stats of the vehicle, experience levels on the points costs, and some pretty pictures and art. Um, some sneak drop V3 ones seem to be appearing around the place. The starter set for uh, Battle of the Bulge in version 3, that starter set would appear to have um, the copy of the more recent V3 unit cards, and on one of those, there's a couple that have been seen. The Bedford truck apparently that's just been put out for pre-order has a copy,
Hmm?
and also the uh, yeah, the scout car that was part of the set. Here we go. I'm just bringing it up now for pre-order because I found it. So what people have been doing is going to this generic image for the starter set, which shows you all the cool stuff that you get in it. By the way, another awesome idea for a starter set, Battle of Bulge. Um,
Love it.
and they bring it up and they zoom down, and this actually is in a good resolution so you can see it. And this is the M8 Greyhound armored car. Tells you the factions you're able to take it in: US, British, and I think it's French. Um, Damage value 7 plus, that I believe is the same. Then it's got like transport capacity, I think is hidden by the smoke marker, wheeled vehicle. But
Hmm.
then you actually look at the weapons, and when you zoom in on the weapons, you've got the light anti-tank gun, which is still 48 shots, sorry, 48 range, one shot, pen 4.
10-4.
And so that part's all the same. Then it seems to have special after it, which might refer to as just some generic special text. Um,
The Bedford one has special rules. That bit's
yes,
not covered on it,
yep.
and it has a dash next to a light machine gun, which is 4 shots at 36 inches.
Yep. So an LMG, at least points wise, we don't
Is,
know.
as we
I'd
know
love
and
to
love it.
see it drop, but the actual profile is the same. Then we have one of the two next ones, which are absolute killers. So heavy machine gun gets range out to 48 inches and goes to 6 shots and still has the +1 pen. That is
Yeah, baby.
a literal double number of shots and an extra 12 inches of range on top of it. And suddenly, heavy machine
Oh,
guns.
I think the HMGs had 48 inches in
Oh,
V2.
did they? Oh, okay. I thought they
I
had
think so.
36. But either way, doubling the number of shots to bring them in alignment with what was meant to be probably in V2, um, really, really good. Like, that is a positive thing for anything that wants to take heavy machine gun, be it man-based or on a vehicle. That was sorely needed. So that looks like it's happening, and I'm very, very happy about that. Not because it
No, you're
justifies
right.
our podcast
36.
name, not because it justifies our podcast name at all. Um,
Yeah, I think we have to change our podcast name because,
we're gonna have to.
the
The
whole
whole
thing was
thing's
that
gonna have to change.
we were the thing that made HMGs valuable,
I know, and the players packs where we made fun of that vehicle that you could downgrade the howitzer to a heavy machine gun for like minus 80 points or whatever, and it was literally pointless. That might actually be worth it.
Uh,
um,
this is just Warlord sending us a love letter. That's what it is.
yeah,
Thank you. We love you
yeah,
too, Warlord.
yes,
Nice.
it's
It's nice
great.
to be seen. We
And
felt so
then
seen.
and then so it's also got whether it's pint or mounted or coax, which is the standard thing. And then you've got the medium machine gun, which is 36 inches, so still the same range, but 6 shots. So medium machine guns also going up one on the number of shots.
Hmm.
Now
Hmm.
that is considering if we talk about some of the big offenders from V2,
Hmm.
vehicle mounted machine guns were fairly high up that list. So
Oh
now
yeah.
that they've gone to 6 shots, and I appreciate historically there's a way to rationalize that down to shots per minute, and that the six is actually probably appropriate for the speed of a rifle shot. I actually don't disagree with that component. Now I really want to see the points though, and I really want to see the options available. And it's like, so what did we do to minimize all the different types of gun wagons that
Machine
ran
gun boats.
around?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so, and
Yeah.
that's where I was talking, where we were talking about the Bedford truck. That was an interesting one
Mm.
because it has a light machine gun. Trucks used to be able to take medium machine guns. Could we see, hypothetically, all trucks suddenly only able to take light machine guns? That would be a big change. It gets them down to 4 shots at a time. Reduces that impact. Uh, or maybe they won't change at all. Maybe they'll just stay as they are. Um, but I'm really interested to see like the vehicle fire rules and
Mm.
whether or not they have incorporated, not that I would have been the only one to suggest it, but incorporated a suggestion of some sort of limit to how many weapons can actually be fired.
Yeah.
Because
Or
then
or a roll the hit modifier or something.
yeah,
For
yeah,
every additional weapon, it's -1
it's
to
minus ones
all
where you start
weapons.
stacking it. You know, uh, because I think that because Dakar Stewards are a problem because they can fire every weapon. It's not actually because of the weapon profile. Yes, they're too cheap. I acknowledge that, but um, but it's actually because they can fire every weapon. If Dacre Stewarts were only able to fire, say, three of the five weapon systems they have, they're no different to a Panzer III firing. They're no different to a Sherman opening up with a Pintle and coax and hull mount.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
then you've just got a really thin paper box that does the same thing as a Sherman. So I think it would be interesting to see what they've done there, but we won't know that till we get a bit more
Yeah.
information.
I think also what is worth mentioning here is that if you look at the Bedford um, card for the light machine gun, it has the special rules open and it just says dash. It doesn't have a special rule. Whereas the heavy machine gun, the medium machine gun, and the light anti-tank gun, for what it's worth, the special rules section has been omitted. It's covered up by like a fake tear in the card. So I actually think what we're going to see is that there's going to be light machine guns in infantry squads, for example, are going to have a special rule, whereas the light machine guns on vehicles are not. And there could be something about medium machine guns where they have either the same or a better special rule, and same with the HMGs that translate over to vehicles. But you know, this is total speculation here, but this is kind of where what I would expect to see. If there isn't a negative hit modifier for these special, like these additional weapons on vehicles, I would expect to see some play in the weapon special rules for sure.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. I think there is there's a few things there which I really want to see more information on to try and go, oh, okay, they've
Mm.
gone one way or the other. Um, but I mean, overall, looking at, and again, we're going to find out about MGs tomorrow at about 10 o'clock, 10:01 at night.
Well, 24 hours, yeah,
Yeah. Um, and so
from time of recording.
from time of recording, and so we might get some of those answers coming through, but um, I do think that overall the impressions I'm getting of where we're going, how and why, um, I feel comfortable,
Mm.
with what they're doing, and I feel like I'm going to be able to enjoy this game potentially. And I enjoyed version 2. I enjoyed version 1. I enjoyed version 2 quite a lot anyway, accepting it for what it was. And the things I didn't like about it, I just sort of chalked up and kept going. But um, the army selection, I'm looking forward to finding out not just what is considered good, but what I like to play, like how I actually want to
Mm.
craft that army and how I want to play within the force. Because that's something that, if you want to play well currently in bolt action, as you said, you basically need to find the best way to annihilate your opponent as quickly as possible so you can just cap out all the objectives. That doesn't work in every mission, but it works in a lot of them. Um, oh, that's the other thing. Like, what they're doing with missions, full stop, like to understand that piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, there's a mission generator in there as well.
Yeah, yeah,
I know we lost our like collective minds over it before, but still, like, look, this episode's been long enough. Let's not
yeah.
rehash things that we've covered before. Um, 100% agree. I can't wait to build lists. I'd love to hear all of the news and stuff that you guys have, all of the ideas as well, particularly about what you're going to do with these army composition lists. One thing that we didn't kind of cover and touch on, but one thing I would very much expect is that there's going to be tools that the infantry have that is going to make them much more lethal against tanks. There's a couple of clues on that. A lot of these
Yeah,
come from Sean Mullen's post on the Bolt Action Facebook group. I can't pretend to take any credit for this. He was the person who kind of did the sleuthing on this, but I think he presents a very strong case. Basically, if I distill it down, is that there are anti-tank grenades everywhere in all of the new things with version 3. The model that comes with the rulebook is known for stopping a tank assault with anti-tank grenades. The new sprues all have anti-tank rifle grenades. So if we see rifle grenades as like a staple in bolt action, like I just retire. I've done everything that I needed to do. We got HMG teams in that are good. We got anti-tank, or we just got rifle grenades in the game that are great, and we got realistic historical army composition. I just retire. Like,
I think we're
I've
done at
done
that
my job
point.
as a lobbyist.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We can't even call ourselves the rifle grenades.
No. Um, yeah, it's yeah, I think there are some, yeah, there are definitely a few things, and more is going to come to light where we might get even some other sneak peeks that drop around the place. But um, this all looks very exciting.
Amazing.
Yeah,
I love it. I
yeah.
can't wait.
All right. Well, look, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. If you did come through with this 2 hours, we will continue to do a bit of coverage. We're probably going to try and save up as much news as possible so we can get some good discussion happening rather than cover everything immediately. We've got at least another 4 weeks of tidbits that Warlord is going to drop, so we'll get in there and we'll try and get Jacob on board as well to follow up on some things for us. But look, this is the HMG podcast. We are definitely still going through. We haven't not disappeared off the end of the world. And there's lots of things that are still coming up. I'm just going to say battle for Madagascar. And we'll there's a few things that are coming that'll land in V3. Um, but I've been Daniel, and Gorchin's joined me here, and we will catch you next time.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.